What is up, YouTube? Mox Opal back with another video. We're not doing a review per se. This is more of like some help with the Stubby. I have a review up of a build, excuse me, and a review up of the Stubby itself. And a lot of people have come because there's not a lot of videos of builds. And like, oh, I get 2 or 3 hits and I'm getting a dry fire. I hope yours works. Okay, but still, like I did in my review of the build, I still haven't once had a dry hit. Not unless I went like too high a wattage for my coils. Remember, regulate your wattage depending on the coil that you put in. I should have put all that inside of my review too. And I should actually do a video on that for people. So like these here, you got a 0.32 ohm coil, 0.4 ohm coil, twisted coil, mixed twisted coil. There is a big difference. Okay, and a lot of people are like, oh, I'm getting dry hits. Maybe your watts are too high for the ohms of the coil that you have. Maybe the watts are too high for the type of coil you have for a mixed or a flat or twisted or a super Clapton or an alien. There's a number of things that could actually make you have a dry hit. I'm trying to find a tool here so I could actually take the Stubby tank out and actually show you. There's a number of things. Like you could have too high a wattage depending on your coil. So look up a chart online. Be like, okay, this is my resistance that I'm running inside of my coil. What is the best wattage? Start at the lowest and go work your way up in increments until you get to like that too hot and too dry hitting spot and kind of dumb it down a couple of notches. Because that could just be the case that you actually got too high a wattage. Could also be that you have too high a wattage depending on the coil that you have. Like I said, a super Clapton, a mixed twisted, a mixed, a flat twisted. They're all different. Okay, and like mixed twisteds and flat twisteds, all that type of stuff, a lot of them are twisted and made for like flavor based and stuff like that, but still to that point could be you're running too high of watts depending on your ohms, your resistance, your voltage, even off your batteries, everything. A lot of people got to learn that like with this type of mod, is technically like a mech mod almost. So you're going to run a lot of voltage and like straight wattage straight from when you fire the button because you're only running 2 contacts, and the chipboard here when you have your battery is just this pin and just this pin that goes over to here with a couple of prongs. So maybe your battery's too high of wattage for your coil to the point to like the ohms and the resistance and the voltage that you're running off there. Say you got an 18650 that's 4,000 milliamps, which is pretty high. It's going to push a lot of voltage, which is going to make the resistance of your coil a little bit different too, to where it might fire quicker, might fire faster, might fire hotter. So you got to keep all of that in mind too. Or it could simply be just on your Stubby tank that your wicking's off. You know, and like I said for my wicking, and one side's weirdly flatter than the other, but take and always make sure that you have enough cotton in the middle here, touching every bit of this coil on the inside. Every little bit of it. And I mean every bit of it. Because if a cotton is not touching the coil, it'll get hot. It'll make a hot spot. So you have to have this cotton touching every little bitty piece of the coil in there. So when you build, make sure it's always nice and thick right here. But then when you get out here, do your normal thinning and keep it thin. And like I said in the video, do your little tuck and kind of like set the little danglies right on top of that. But, you know, keep it long, but not too long, to where you have enough cotton still sitting on top of the steel cables actually very well enough. Like you have, as you can see it, you know, enough cotton sitting there like that. But just keep the middle as thick as you possibly can, and keep the ends thin, but not as thin as you can. You don't want to go really thin because you don't want a bunch of spitback. So find your preference of how thin you like it here on for here, because as you see, like my video, I have not changed the cotton in this, and it's still juiced up like this. Like you can touch it and see juiced. Like I haven't changed it since that review, and I'm still going strong on that same cotton. And that brings it to another fact of like your dry hits could be also because of the type of cotton that you're using. Because I used to use the cheap ones that would come just inside the packages. Like I don't even remember the name of it. Here in our local shops, we had some pretty cheap ones. You're talking like $2 a bag cheap for like 20 pieces. Some cheap cotton. Alright, and then I switched to this one that I thought would be kind of cool. And it was a little better, but really weird, which was called Twist. And it's an oily cotton, and it would fire pretty hot on it because it has oils on that, because it's a flavored cotton. That's cinnamon. So like the cinnamon oil that is on the cotton already to make your whatever vape juice have a little bit of cinnamon would fire a lot faster, and it'd like kind of almost like having seasonings in a frying pan. It would cook that on top of the juice and kind of make a weird dry hit constantly. So then I'd switch to the bacon, but I only get the prime. You know, you don't get many, but like 10 pieces in here. But the prime, you can get it in the strips, or you can get it in shoelace. Shoelace, yeah, is good to a point depending on what you're putting it in, because the shoelace I have found, like in one of my RTAs, no matter how I build it, as thin as I could, it would just spit back constantly and collapse. And then it would be a little bit too thick, and it'd always have dry spots no matter what I did. So the shoelace is kind of depending on which mod you have. But running that inside of here, perfect. Alright, just 60 watts still. From I have not changed it from the other vape video. Full flavor still. Yes. Still juicing. Not getting any dry hits. Okay. So what I just told you, take all of that into mind, okay? Maybe you're just running too high watts, because maybe you like a hotter hit like I do. But on the Stubby, you don't need to run a high watt, because you can put this down to 40 watts and still actually blow clouds and get a lot of flavor and still have a nice warm hit. The only time that you should be running like anywhere from, say, 60 watts on up is if you have a coil that's like really low resistance. You're talking like maybe 0.2 ohm, or or like 0.15 ohm, in that low resistance, because the lower resistance, the higher the wattage you can go. But you always got to make sure the middle of your coil and basically the whole coil on the inside has to have cotton touching it, no matter what. The whole coil has to have cotton touching it, every little spot that there is, period, or else it'll get a dry spot and you'll get a dry hit. So make sure in the middle of your coil, no matter what, is as thick as you possibly can get it without like bending your coil and moving it around too much. And make sure the ends on a tank like this that has to sit on steel cables or sit on the sides and wells or are as thin as you can get them without having a lot of spit back, and you'll be perfectly fine. So make sure thick in the middle, thin on the outside, and you should be okay. Other than that, the only thing I could really tell you is you might have your wattage too high for the type of resistance that you have on your coils, like I showed you on them ones. Like I usually run, like, say, anywhere from 0.3 to 0.4, and run that at about 55 watts. And as you've seen, nice long draw, cloud flavor. And sat here and took a bunch of vapes and not one dry hit, because I made sure in the middle of that, up there in the middle, nice and thick, on the ends, nice and thin, but not thin enough to create just a bunch of spit back. And when you're filling this tank, I noticed too, don't fill it all the way up to the top like people try to force it. Only fill it to, like, maybe the rubber seal right here. That way you don't get a lot of spit back up in there too, because the more you juice also your cotton, the more it does expand. And the more your cotton does expand, with a lot of studies that I'd done actually at one of the local schools that was actually here, the more saturated your cotton will get, the more it'll actually puff out and collapse. So make sure, like, it doesn't always happen. It's kind of a rare thing, but so make sure that you, like, just juice her up to the well right here, and you should be fine. I mean, it's still about almost 7 milliliters of juice. That's quite a bit of juice, honestly. Check your battery. See how many voltage and ampage it is. Maybe you're pushing too much volts to a type of resistance on a coil that you shouldn't be, that's making it fire too fast and too hot at that point and creating a hot spot. But the main things that you need to check first is check the coil, fire it on top of another mod, see where the hot spot's at, and then take a look at it and see if your cotton has collapsed or if you have cotton even touching that spot. If you have a hot spot and there's no cotton touching that spot, your cotton's not thick enough and touching the coil at that point in time. So like I said, on the coil, make sure it's always as thick as you can get it, to where the cotton is all over that coil at all times, no matter what. And make it as thin as possible on the other ends, and you should be perfect. After that, just make sure you're running at the wattage that you need for the type of resistance on the coil that you have. And you should be perfect to go at that point. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me. My email is actually inside of my info on my channel. Like and subscribe if you need to. Leave me a comment, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I notice that I have a comment. Moxo below.